Good morning, everyone. Call the joint hearing to order. And again, because we are doing this hybrid, I just have to make a quick announcement that, as we all know, is part of these events. First, some administrative and technical notes. Members are reminded that they must be visible on screen within the software platform for the purposes of identity verification. Members must continue to use the software platform's video function while attending the hearing unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. If you experience technical difficulties, please contact committee staff for assistance. When you're recognized, video will be broadcast via television and internet feeds. You will be recognized as normal for questions, but if you want to speak at another time, you must seek recognition verbally. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking, and remember to unmute prior to speaking. Please be aware that there is a slight lag between when you start speaking and when the camera shot switches to you. Please remember to keep the software platform's video function on for the entirety of the time that you're attending this hearing. If you leave for a short period for reasons other than joining a different proceeding, please remove your video function. Leave your video function on. If you're leaving to join a different proceeding or will be absent for a significant period of time, you should exit the software platform entirely and then rejoin if you return. Please be advised I've designated a committee staff member to mute unrecognized members' microphones. If necessary, please use the platform's chat feature to communicate with staff regarding technical or logistical support issues. Finally, you will see a 5-minute countdown clock on the software platform's display, but if necessary, I will remind you when your time is up. With that said, I have opening remarks, which I'm going to submit for the record, just make a couple quick comments and then turn it over to my fellow leaders here from Sea Power and from Readiness. Again, thank you, Admiral Lesher and Admiral Kitchener, for joining us this morning. Again, the topic today, which is the state of the surface Navy, we've had classified briefings in the last couple months or so to talk about again, events surrounding Bonhomme Richard, also in the context of McCain and Fitzgerald, and really about the fact that, the entire enterprise of the Navy, really, I think, needs congressional input to really make sure that, the country's investment is being utilized efficiently and competently. And I would just say, obviously all of us up on the dais here, we've been going to briefings nonstop in terms of the situation in Ukraine. A lot of the focus is on the land warfare aspect, with obviously the invasion in the northern part of the country. But as we saw this morning, there is definitely a sea power aspect to this with the battle going around Mariupol and the coastal region there. And I think a lot of us know that the U.S. Navy is not absent from this, but it really reinforces the fact that what we're talking about here today is really not sort of a, an issue that is sort of in normal peacetime context. What we're talking about here is really making sure that in the world we're living in, that the Navy is going to be able to, again, participate without any unforced errors in terms of its own readiness. And that's really why I think it's just so important that, the two of you are here today to help us achieve that goal. With that, I will yield to my ranking member, Rob Whitman, for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Chairman Courtney, for yielding. I want to especially thank Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Walz, for participating in this detailed review of our Navy's surface posture. Incredibly important. My friends, great power competition is already here, and we're currently not set up to prevail. With President Biden's inept withdrawal from Afghanistan, Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and Xi's continued Chinese expansion, both in terms of military size and political will, we have arrived at a new period of international instability. Our desire to maintain strategic advantage and tactical overmatch is being challenged on a daily basis. A change in our national security strategy is sorely needed, one that prioritizes war fighting in the near term. And yet, as I look at the Department of Defense priorities of tackling COVID, building diversity, and elevating climate change as a national priority, our warfighting focus appears to be particularly askew. Even the Navy continues to advocate for a divest to reinvest strategy that, at its core, presumes that maritime conflict will not occur this decade. I categorically reject this notion. I ascribe to the warnings of our PACOM commanders who believe that conflict will likely occur in the near term. To accomplish this reality, we need to adjust our strategic priorities to ensure that our nation is not ready to support Battle Force 2045, but rather ready to support a conflict now. The lack of urgency in national security planning is particularly disheartening. Last year, the Navy requested that 1 destroyer, no amphibs, and proposed to retire 7 large surface combatants whose firepower exceeded that of the entire British Navy. The Navy provided a 30-year shipbuilding plan that was only good for 1 year. The Navy submitted a shipyard recapitalization plan with little financial backing. And the Navy continues to underman our surface Navy, who is currently lacking over 5,000 sailors. And while I'm glad that Congress rebuffed a series of Navy proposals last year, this lack of national security planning unsettles our allies and unnerves the industrial base that craves real leadership. Our Navy needs to wake up, change their calculus, and support a new strategic reality. I remain committed toward providing a surface Navy that meets the combatant commander's requirements. And while I'm pleased that the Flight 3 destroyer with a new radar and a new multi-mission frigate, I'm concerned that the CNO's stretch goal of deploying large unmanned surface vessels alongside an aircraft carrier in the next 5 years is too much too soon. And I'm particularly troubled by the purported amphibious ship reductions. Commandant Berger's vision should be fully embraced and resourced. As to the surface Navy culture, I want to thank our witnesses for supporting an independent review of a new surface warfare officer career path and training alternatives that align with the Merchant Marine. Additionally, I'm pleased that we specifically included an assessment in last year's defense bill to specifically review female retention rates. I think all of these assessments are essential for a more effective surface warfare culture. In closing, I am reminded of one of my favorite Navy quotes by George Washington, where he said, "It follows then, as certain as the night succeeds the day, that without a decisive naval force, we can do nothing definitive, and with it, everything honorable and glorious." It is time that we relearn the lessons of the past. Again, I appreciate Chairman Courtney for his leadership, Chairman Garamendi for his leadership, and Ranking Member Waltz for their support and efforts in having this important hearing. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Whitman. Now recognize the chair of the House Readiness Subcommittee, Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. Even as we grow more distance from many of the events, let us say at the outset that we continue to grieve and remember the 17 sailors who died on the USS McCain and Fitzgerald in the collisions of 2017. We also honor the over 60 sailors and civilians that were injured while battling the fire on the USS Bonhomme Richard. Now, we're holding this hearing today because, unfortunately, as the Navy itself has concluded, these tragedies in the surface Navy were avoidable. Ensuring that they never happen again requires consistent attention. I very much appreciate the Navy's attention to manning, training, maintenance, and cultural issues that contributed to the losses, and today our witnesses' continued willingness to engage with our subcommittees. I also recognize the institutional significant reforms will take time. However, I remain haunted by some of the turns of phrases that appear consistently throughout the investigation of the accidents. Cascade of failures, accumulation of risk, and on and on. While I know that this slate of Navy leadership takes these issues extremely seriously and has given deep thought to improving the readiness and well-being of the surface forces, the GAO report released just last month contains very troubling testimony from the sailors of the fleet today. They report being overworked, understaffed, sleep-deprived, insufficiently trained, and ill-equipped to perform basic maintenance tasks. I worry that the Navy's progress in implementing findings from these accident investigations might mostly be on paper, and that in practice they're not translated into lasting change. I don't see the evidence today that the Surface Navy has yet achieved sufficient progress reversing the entrenched habits of inadequate manning and training, delayed maintenance, and chronic overuse of the force. I do recognize that chronic overuse of the force is not the Surface Navy's, does not come from the Surface Navy, but rather from the combatant commanders. I worry that the Surface Navy is not thinking deeply enough about how to change the culture to evaluate morale and to employ and to empower officers and sailors to voice concerns when they see problems. Finally, as we consider the sources of these problems and their potential solutions, I must ask our witnesses to consider whether they could do more to constrain the combatant commanders and their insatiable appetite to use the force, so much so that the force is degraded. We're experiencing unprecedented challenges today, and we must consider whether the combatant commander's requests should be prioritized or deprioritized to ensure that our ships and sailors get the adequate time in port, in training, and in preparation to prepare for any contingency. I also want to compliment our two witnesses today that have taken all that I have said and all that others have said into action. And I expect today that we'll hear about how you intend to address these issues. Thank you so very much. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. I'll now recognize the new ranking member on the Readiness Subcommittee, Mike Waltz, this is his, I guess, maiden voyage as ranking member. Congratulations on
thank
your
you.
position.
Thank you.
And,
in the Army, we say that's a case of beer that I owe everyone. But
that might be arranged.
yeah. Look, thank you, both of our witnesses, for coming. Thank you for the conversation over the last few days. And I certainly associate myself with the comments of the chairman and both chairmen and ranking members. And I think you're absolutely seeing the bipartisan concern and how critically important this committee takes the health, strength, and readiness of our surface fleet. I do want to recognize much has been done since 2017. Numerous investigations in the aftermath of those incidents have pointed to some common themes, some common threads and challenges across the organization. I think rightly in many cases, most cases, the finger was pointed at fatigue, increased demand, high op tempo, undermanning, poor material condition, lack of training, low priority on maintenance, among some other core problems. Over the past several years, Congress has acted. Frankly, many times we haven't acted in time in terms of the continuing resolutions. However, Congress has acted, reports were issued, recommendations implemented within the Navy to drive reform into a system that was creating unsafe conditions and eroding our readiness. Yet, as we sit here today, I am concerned, and I share my colleagues' concern, that the Navy, to be candid, hasn't sufficiently addressed some of these chronic problems. I was incredibly disheartened to hear, and I read the entire report, to hear from the GAO report that was issued last month that painted a picture of a fleet that remains overworked and understaffed, and that sailors at their level continue to cite some of the exact same issues and conditions that led to the 2017 disasters as concerning, to say the least. That same report also detailed a lack of planning and performance data, which I found really troubling and surprising, the lack of data in our intermediate level of maintenance. And as I shared with you, having managed large Army fleets, what the operator does affects what the intermediate level maintenance does, greatly affects what happens at the depot level, and therefore the readiness of that fleet and our naval fleet. So as we're confronted with the challenges my colleagues have laid out for high-end conflict, and as we discussed, we're overlaying what we're getting briefed by the intelligence community of what is imminent and what is around the corner versus these longer-term problems. I think we have a timeline disconnect, and I look forward to hearing how you're going to address that. We just can't afford to talk about the issues anymore. We need to talk about real solutions and when they're going to be implemented and what kind of impact they're going to have. I do understand some of these are going to take time, but here we are almost 5 years from the McCain-Fitzgerald. That was a wake-up call then, and I think we're getting a wake-up call in Europe right now that this type of high-end conflict isn't a thing of the past. And so today I do hope to hear those concrete steps. I look forward to your candor on how we can work together to improve the Navy surface readiness. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Waltz. It's now time to recognize our witnesses, and I assume Vice CNO Admiral William Lesher, Vice Chief of Naval Operations from the Department of the Navy, will lead off, and the floor is yours, Admiral.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Courtney, Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Whitman, Ranking Member Waltz, distinguished members of the House Armed Services Subcommittees on Sea Power and Readiness, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the actions we're taking to deliver consistently strong performance across the surface force and the broader Navy. The imperative for us to work together to deliver the warfighting advantage that American security requires has never been clearer, as just talked about here, given Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine and an authoritarian China bent on military growth allied with Russia. In this security context today, the U.S. Navy is the world's most ready and lethal Navy. And that's not happy talk, that's proven performance, demonstrated and consistently meeting combatant commanders' objectives across the globe while completing just last year more than 1 million flying hours, 22,000 steaming days, 59 major maintenance availabilities. As we speak, the Navy has increased our forward posture in response to the European commander's assurance and deterrence requirement, with a deployed naval force sufficient to deter and defeat, if necessary, any aggression in the European maritime theater. This force includes the Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group, which continues to demonstrate integrated high-end maritime strike capabilities with our NATO allies. An important element of our conversation today will be the actions we are taking to accelerate capabilities and performance beyond this advantage. We're bringing a strong sense of urgency in improving today's baseline performance, given China's clearly stated intent to become the world's preeminent military and Russia's sustained threats and unprovoked aggression. This urgency also reflects the imperative and the opportunity to deliver more consistently strong Navy performance in service of accelerating that advantage. Today's Navy features many strong teams with great culture and exceptional performance. Yet we also see instances of teams with poor culture and weak performance. The unacceptable loss of the Bonhomme Richard is a stark reminder of the gap between our strongest and our weakest performers, and this gap must be eliminated. Our appreciation of the systemic causes underlying this variability has deepened as we studied the similarities in root causes, leading to tragic outcomes such as the Fitzgerald and McCain collisions and the major fires review events, as well as from studying the best practices that we consistently see in high-performing Navy units. We've learned that the root causes of the unacceptable variability in Navy performance stem primarily from an outdated approach to institutional learning. And this has led to inconsistent use across the Navy of those Navy best leadership and problem-solving practices. Our institutional learning approach has too often treated poor performance as isolated failures and overemphasized instructions, checklists, and rules as the fix, while undervaluing the human element, the development and training of our people, a learning mindset, problem ownership, critical thinking. The inconsistent use of Navy best learning and problem-solving practices results from this weak institutional learning, which has failed to consistently implement across the Navy the best practices routinely seen in areas such as the impressive self-critical learning of our air wing and surface warfare teams during FAL and integrated training, which generates the most combat-capable strike groups in the world, or the transparently embrace the red learning and performance to plan efforts that have driven the highest F-18 mission-capable levels in 10 years, or the strong self-assessment and learning that underpins Naval Reactor's world-class safety record. Building on this deeper appreciation of root cause, in January, the Chief of Naval Operations issued a new charge of command and a call to action for every Navy leader to apply the Navy-proven best practices that empower our people to achieve exceptional performance. We are teaching and leading implementation of these self-assessing, self-correcting practices, which we call Get Real, Get Better, through our type commanders and other community senior leaders. The call to action also provides specific countermeasures to the institutional learning weakness, with key organizational changes that ensure it's enduring, and they include the 4-Star Learning to Action Board, which tests whether prior corrective measures remain in effect and are delivering their intended effect, and the Naval Safety Command, which will now not only assess frontline unit safety performance, but also evaluate and hold accountable the entire chain of command for how it supports subordinate units in managing risk and building a strong safety culture. With these changes, the Navy is making clear that we will reward and promote leaders based not only on the strong outcomes they achieve, but also on the teams they build and the learning culture they develop. I'm confident that this approach, in concert with the initiatives that Vice Admiral Kitchener will highlight, is the best path to accelerating warfighting advantage, and I look forward to partnering with the committees to make this advance in Navy culture come fully alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. And he's joined today by Admiral Kitchener, who is Commander Naval Surface Force U.S. Pacific Fleet. Again, thank you for joining us again, Admiral Kitchener. You've been here before, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Courtney, Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Whitman, Ranking Member Waltz, and members of the Sea Power and Readiness Subcommittees. I thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding the state of the Surface Navy. Today, your ships are underway across the globe and stand ready to win at sea against any opponent. 67 surface combatants are deployed worldwide in support of our nation's strategic interests. Daily, our ships are postured forward where it matters to foster partnerships, bolster allied defenses, and ensure free sea lanes. As we approach 5 years since the 2017 collisions, the Surface Force has taken essential steps toward improving the way we produce more ready ships. We have made a lot of progress, but as a learning organization, it's prudent to self-assess and continue to find ways to improve our methods and practices. The Surface Force, in line with the Chief of Naval Operations' call to get real, get better, is taking urgent action to analyze our processes, reduce variability, and refine our methods of producing more ready ships with tactically sound crews prepared to deter in competition and win in conflict. Warfighting at sea is our identity as surface warriors. In January, I released a strategic alignment document to the Surface Force, focusing our efforts across the enterprise to increase the readiness of the force we have today and prepare the force of tomorrow. These efforts focus across 5 lines of effort, each serving as a pillar to support the most capable surface force in the world. The lines of effort include developing the leader, warrior, mariner, and manager, producing more ready ships, achieving excellence in fleet introduction, create clear and innovative operational concepts, and establishing the infrastructure for the future fleet. The dynamic environment we face today and in the future demands bold action with urgency now. Our investments in manning and training the force have improved our warfighting advantage. Sailors remain our critical component of that advantage, and we are committed to honing both their tactical competence and technical proficiency to keep our ships ready. Through Ready Relevant Learning on the Surface Training Advanced Virtual Environment, we modernize the way our sailors learn the technical and tactical skill sets necessary to fight and win. We continue to improve our trainers, capitalizing on live virtual constructive simulators to provide complex warfighting scenarios. The continued development of our surface warfighting experts, our WITIs, our warfare tactics instructors, lead the charge in sharpening our competitive edge and serve as a means to drive out variability in tactical proficiency across the force. The Surface Force is also improving maintenance and committed to delivering new ships and weapon systems to the fleet. We are applying data analytics and leveraging derived insights to produce more ready ships for tasking. Since 2019, we have reduced our days of maintenance delay and C&O availabilities by 41%, and our on-time completion steadily increased from 34% in fiscal year 19 to 59% for all 2021 availabilities. While we have made progress, many challenges lie ahead as we modernize our force. Our DDG modernization program is online, and the systems we are bringing to the fleet ensure we will maintain our competitive edge over our adversaries. Next year, we will commission the first Flight 3 DDG, USS Jack Lucas. Today, the captain and the crew are on board and preparing to deliver enhanced warfighting capability to the force. We are using our energy, our activity, and our industry to prepare for a complex and challenging future. Everything we do as an enterprise focuses on producing ships and crews ready to fight and win. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you to both the witnesses. Again, I just have one question, and I'll again yield to other members. First of all, I just would say that I would note that the comments of both witnesses where you're acknowledging that something is going on here that is systemic and that it's not a one-off type of event, as you said in page 3 of your testimony, Admiral Lesher, I think actually is significant that, that we're not going to sort of brush this off on an ad hoc, one time and, nothing to see here kind of approach. And it seemed like one of the levers that you identified in your testimony in terms of how you're going to get to that sort of systemic change is the Learning to Action Board, which is, again, trying to get this new approach sort of, pushing it down throughout, the entire enterprise. So, but I guess what I was wondering if you could describe how the Navy is going to implement that new type of learning at every level in the organization, not just at the Pentagon, but at waterfronts and aboard individual ships, and maybe even at Great Lakes in terms of just at the very origination of our Navy. So again,
yes, sir.
The floor is yours.
The Learning to Action Board is not aspirational. It's met 3 times already, and to your point, it's providing the structure that's closing a feedback loop that I think was absent before. We had things such as the Readiness Reform Oversight Council that implemented 111 recommendations from the Fitz-McCain reviews. The Learning to Action Board is that, but it's enduring, and it not only implements and verifies implementation, but it goes back now and it tests after implementation. Are those recommendations still in effect? Are the fixes making a difference? Chairman, part of the insight for that was in 2012, the USS Miami had an arsonist start a fire, and that ship burned to an irreparable state. The Navy believed we were a learning organization and implemented fixes for that largely revolved around the NAVC Instruction 8010. In 2020, the USS Bonhomme Richard, as an alleged arsonist, start a fire. That ship burns to an irreparable state. Where's the learning there? And so what we learned as part of the very strong conversation we had in November was that instruction, those policies were not coming alive in the private shipyards and were not coming alive with the triad of the USS Bonhomme Richard. So we had unacknowledged risk, unseen risk in terms of self-talk of we put a fix in place, but it was not widely being in the private shipyards effective. And so Learning to Action Board is a specific countermeasure to that effect. The L2AB has met 3 times. It's laser focused on bringing velocity to Bonhomme Richard implementation. It also, at the last board, took as its first feedback loop to go back and look at the Fitz and McCain 111 implementations. Are those still in effect? Are they delivering the intended effect? Chairman, to your question on how do we scale that down vertically, that's the other structure. So the Naval Safety Command, and in the interest of time, I perhaps won't go into that in great detail, but the Naval Safety Command is a reorientation fundamental of the Naval Safety Center to a down echelon where Naval Safety Center never looked at the fleet, the TICOM, or the ISIC commander. It always looked at the S5 unit as an assist visit. Naval Safety Command audit the fleet, the TICOM, the ISIC, the immediate superior in command. How are you executing your safety oversight? Audit that, feedback, transfer best practices. At the S5 level, at the unit, what is new is it'll be an evaluation. It will come up echelon to take our blinders off about what we're seeing broadly across the fleet, and it will include in the same best practice as INSERV does, an assessment of the unit's ability to self-assess, which is fundamental to this get better orientation that will scale the learning. in serve evaluates a unit and a unit commander's ability to self-assess material condition. Safety Command will assess that for safety performance.
Well, thank you, Admiral. Chair now recognizes Mr. Whitman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your service to our nation. Thanks for joining us today. Admiral Lesher, today's hearing is about the state of the surface Navy. I want to go to the words of both the former and present PACOM commander as they look at the threats that they face, saying that China is indeed the pacing threat, that they look towards an action by China within this decade, within the next 6 years. And from that standpoint, I want to ask in a series of questions. First of all, do you agree with their assessment as far as China being the pacing threat? Do you agree with the timing of where the threat would manifest itself? And if so, what's the contradiction then on what they're saying with Battle Force 2045 and what we would be facing in 2025? And going from there, if we're focused on 2025, the question then is, shouldn't our entire force structure be focused on the near term? And that calls into question the divest to invest or divest to reinvest strategy, whose benefits probably going to be 20 years out in the future. In fact, the investing doesn't take place until well outside the fit-up. As I tell folks, all of our dreams to build the Navy of the future come outside the fit-up. I want to also put in that perspective, last year's budget request from the Navy requested retiring 15 vessels. Those, I think, are incredibly important to our fleet, especially these large surface combatants. I understand all the issues with the CGs, but that would retire a missile capability bigger than the entire British Navy. So I'm just trying to reconcile where the combatant commanders say we are today, the threats at our doorstep. Is China the pacing threat? If it is, and you agree with both combatant commanders and the near term of that threat, then how does that position itself with the 2045 vision versus 2025, and how the Navy reconciles where we need to be with the divest to reinvest strategy?
Yes, sir. No, I appreciate the question. Pacing threat is clearly China. It's stated in the National Defense Strategy. I know of no thoughtful observer who thinks otherwise. The one caveat to that is we do recognize pacing elements, for example, in Russia undersea, because they have the pacing technology there. But the pacing overarching threat is clearly China. Navy brings a strong view that the decade of concern is 2020. And in some respects, that's not a universal view in the department, but we consistently believe and have thought that that's the decade that we see of peak risk and that we're going to be ready for. You highlight, so what does that mean in terms of how we size and shape the force? Is it 25? Is it 45? This is the fundamental dilemma of every budget submission, which is how much in current readiness versus future overmatch. And how do you think about that, and how do you get that right? The way the Navy has consistently delivered our budgets to size and shape the Navy to deliver the most ready and lethal Navy possible is with the following prioritization. Columbia, number one, fact of life, once in a generation recap of our strategic deterrent, non-discretionary, time pressured. Number two priority, readiness today. Number three is modernization. Modernization is what delivers lethality and survivability. And number four is capacity. And our view is, and I believe the committees bring that same view, it's been our approach for a number of years now. Our view is readiness and modernization, i.e. lethality and survivability, are table stakes for any capacity we buy. I know we have the same view of the committees. We're not going to buy capacity that cannot be properly manned, spared, maintained, and trained to. So, in that context, what is the understanding of a budget that divests? And it's an important question. It fundamentally revolves around the best judgment, driven, Ranking Member, by strong analysis. And I know we've shared with the committees not only the integrated naval force structure analysis, but capability analysis. So making these hard choices about Columbia, readiness, capability, and capacity revolves around not only what the campaign analysis shows is the capacity required to win a distributed maritime operation fight against China, but also what's the mix of that force? And again, I know you and the committees pay attention to this well. When CNO talked about a 500-ship Navy, he didn't talk about 500 tug and salvage ships. He talked about a specific mix, which is to say there's other attributes that we look at very closely that drive that mix and those choices. Some of the key attributes that start to indicate why in making hard choices we would divest 30-year-old cruisers include our ability to put long-range fires downrange, our ability to maneuver in the adversary weapon engagement zone, our ability to operate our ships without frequent resupply in a contested logistics environment, and our ability to defend against incoming raids and attrite them with hard kill and soft kill capabilities. So in that context, beyond capacity, bringing these other important measures and attributes of the force is what leads to our best judgment that the most ready and lethal force against a pacing threat of China looks like what was delivered with the budget.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Whitman. Chair now recognizes Mr. Garamendi, Chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee.
Admiral Lesher, thank you for your discussion about the necessity to balance today, tomorrow, and the next decade. Obviously very complex. We will spend a lot of time working through that. Today I want to really get into how to make the existing fleet operate more effectively, more efficiently, more safely. You have put 3 different programs before us, the Get Real, Get Better program, the safety program, and the Learn to Action Board program. Could you speak about the integration of these 3 and also how that integration, assuming they are to be integrated, how that reduces the paperwork and how you would assess the effectiveness?
Thank you for that question, Chairman. This idea of simplify, streamline, and align is critical, right? It can't be additive and just, we actually recognize that as a causal factor for weak performance, where our former view of what it meant to be a learning organization was to write an instruction, a guideline, a regulation, and we're overwhelming our triads and our leadership's ability to process all of that. So an absolute foundation of this approach as we work forward and roll it out across the Navy is to simplify, streamline, align a bunch of existing activity, existing related work. Let's make it clearer. Let's bring it up to elevate to principles and playbooks. In terms of the integration, one of the things I think it's important to highlight is Get Real, Get Better, which is scaling existing Navy best practice, is not something interesting that was read out of a book. Didn't come out of a powerful Harvard Business School case study or some consultant. It's real Navy learning. And so for 3.5 years now, we've been attacking systemic weak Navy performance. Head down, build a little, test a little, learn a lot, scale it. This was the journey that I would highlight as the initial instantiation of F-18s. We had 250 mission-capable F-18 jets from 2008 to 2018. We had a decade of 250 mission-capable jets. The mission-capable rate in 2018 was 55% because the inventory was over 500. So 2018, 2019, we need to think, act, operate differently. And this was the start of the first Get Real engine because the self-talk of the Naval Aviation Enterprise, of which I'm a member, was sequestration's killing us, I need more parts, I need more people, and I need to hire more component repair. When we got in with a thoughtful new approach called Perform to Plan, first of all, we made it not work by a committee, we made it an accountable leader, the air boss. We brought in the driver-based performance, and we brought in digital tools, and we brought in a cadence of accountability for learning. That illuminated the foundation of Navy learning of what it means to be self-assessing, self-correcting. In 2019, after a decade of 250 jets, we drove it to the 341 target, and we've sustained it ever since in COVID. The number today is 350. So that was the kernel of learning that then scaled into the private shipyards. 7,000 days of maintenance delay in 2019, 4,000 in 2020. Admiral Kitchener talked about it's been down 50%. Brought it into supply. That foundation And so how do we integrate it? That illuminated the building on a strong Navy culture, honor, courage, commitment, but how we're going to change our behavior in concert. And what really brought velocity to this rollout was seeing things like Fitz, McCain, and Bon Armour Shard. We said, hey, we're seeing the same things there. And so let's bring velocity to it. CNO made the call to action. We have to teach this, Chairman, because when I've been out doing listening tours, if you talk to many people throughout the Navy, they'll say, we're already doing this. And when I talked to the tribes, they said, no, we're not. We need to have specific understanding what it means to be self-assessing, self-correcting. So I don't want to take more time. Recognize the need to simplify, streamline, and align. Recognize the need for the Learning to Action Board with the Naval Safety Command and this broader teaching on being self-assessing, self-correcting. They're all mutually reinforcing. And I'll be happy to perhaps come by some when convenient.
And I would presume that all of that is for getting at the problems that have been identified: manning, training, maintenance, overuse of the force, and the like. I would appreciate a more detailed description of the integration of these three major tasks that you have undertaken, and then how you intend to judge the successfulness of that integration of those three major tasks. Also, if you would please make sure that we know what you need to carry out these tasks. I'm hesitant. In fact, I refuse to insert my low level of knowledge and overwrite and overrun what you propose to do. But I will use our position to observe and hold you accountable for the implementation of what you intend to do to address the known problems here. One other point is, and this goes to my colleague who talks about the Navy of the future and the Navy of today. We added $24.5 billion to the NDAA, and the question for us is, do we spend that additional $24 billion to achieve the goal that our colleague, Mr. Whitman, has put before us? If we did, good. If we did not use that money to address the problem that he's identified, then shame on us. I'll let it go at that. I do have the list of where that money was spent, and precious little of it was spent to address the problem that he's identified. That's our problem.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. Next, Chair will now recognize Mr. Wilson from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Admirals, again, as a grateful Navy dad, I'm just so honored for your service and your dedication and commitment to our country. And Admiral Kitchener, as we discuss weapons systems, what is the Harpoon missile system capable of as to its placement, portability, range, lethality?
Please turn your microphone.
Microphone? Yep.
The Harpoon weapon system is one of our legacy weapon systems that we're actually phasing out. It's one of our surface-to-surface weapons. It's got about a 75 nautical mile range, but it is scheduled to be phased out and replaced by more capable systems. We could probably have a more robust discussion in a proper setting. Over.
And can it be placed on land?
It can be configured in some sort of, we have experimented with some land options and capability with Harpoon in the past. That is true.
And as to other missile systems, are they being in place now to replace the Harpoon, or what's the status?
We do. We have several different systems that we're developing. One that we've outfitted on our littoral combat ships is the Naval Strike Missile, which is a very capable weapon that's also being utilized by the Marine Corps in their littoral regiments. And then we have a Maritime Strike Tomahawk weapon that we're developing as well. And then some variants of our SM branch of weapons that we've configured for different missions that probably we need to change our setting to discuss those.
And this may be beyond, but can a Javelin missile be used as a missile to attack a vessel or a landing craft?
I would not rule out using any weapon to attack any type of craft or vehicle. It's limited range, and some of the maritime environment is a little bit more unforgiving on certain weapons that were designed for land use. But yes, sir. If I'm not going to tell you that no, we couldn't use it in a short range.
Well, indeed, as I'm thinking of range, we have seen the Putin's Black Sea fleet moving toward the incredible city of Odessa and the horror of the mass murder that Putin, the war criminal, is planning. And just any way that that could be interrupted, stopped, is my interest. And I certainly hope that every effort is being made, working with our Ukrainian allies and our Black Sea allies of Romania and Bulgaria and Turkey. And then with Turkey, Admiral Lesher, I'm grateful that there's been a commitment from our Turkish partners to restrict the Russian access to the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits. Putin's war against innocent people of Ukraine certainly justifies the decision under the Montro Convention. How does the Montro Convention limitation of warships from non-Black Sea nations limit our ability for regional naval power projection? Are there efforts underway to work with the Turkish Minister of Defense to permit American naval transit in the event of crises?
Yeah, thanks for that question, sir. The investments we've made, and I'll keep it at a fairly high level for classification, provide the reach that give our combatant commander opportunity to deliver the effects we need from multiple bodies of water. So don't necessarily have to be in the Black Sea, the Ionian, the Adriatic. There's capability, certainly, with our current laydown, without doubt, to defend our NATO allies. So not an issue. What it does highlight, in a very positive sense, is not only the applicability of that treaty, but from a strategic perspective, where we're focused on integrated deterrence by the U.S. Navy, by the joint force, by the whole of government that you see being done very incredibly well, and through our allies and partners. And so that closure is influencing, obviously, the ability of Russian ships to flow to the Black Sea in a way that is much more impactful on them than our combatant commander.
And I want to point out, too, I was really grateful with the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, working with Congressman Steve Cohen, Senator Ben Cardin, Senator Roger Wicker. We visited Varna, Bulgaria last year, and the incredible people of Bulgaria would love to have naval facilities, U.S., and to go along with their other military facilities of Novo Selo, as Bulgaria stands up as a great part of NATO. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Again, I would just note in terms of the Montro Convention and also the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, in 2018, Putin just totally violated every single principle of maritime law when he seized 3 Ukrainian Navy ships, imprisoned the crew in Moscow for a year, completely incommunicado. The UN Convention for Law of the Sea Treaty Tribunal convicted Russia of complete violation of UNCLOS. I would just note, I think, frankly, that's a perfect example why I think the U.S. should ratify UNCLOS and get part of the structure of enforcing that type of illegal behavior. So anyway, that's my little ad hominem comment and follow-up. Our next member up is Mr. Norcross from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We started out this morning having a quote from General President Washington talking about how important a Navy is, and certainly we couldn't agree more. But something that is remarkably different from the 1700s to where we are today is air threats and space threats. And any decisions we make are made in a very different formula, and where we assess those choices and the risk. And in many ways, it would be great if we just had to choose between land and sea. Would make our job much easier. But the fact of the matter is, we're in a very challenging environment. And you discussed some of the mishaps, the accidents we've had over the course of the last decade, and some of the issues that have been recommended have been put into place. We're coming off a 2-year COVID period that has challenged everybody on this planet, but particularly in our armed forces. Admiral Lesher, talk to me about how we're recruiting that next generation of sailor. How are we getting he or her to not only join, but to stay in the Navy? Because we know it costs so much more money and time to train somebody new than to retain somebody who is experienced. Could you touch base on that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, sir. Absolutely. I would highlight a couple of what I think are best practices and structure we have in the Navy that's making a real difference on that dimension. At boot camp, in terms of how we influence the individuals, one of the key elements is warrior toughness and resiliency training. And I highlight that not only because it's such a success at boot camp in Great Lakes, but we're scaling that now in a continuum across the Navy. So from the day you come into the Navy, whatever your session source is, through milestone events to the day you leave, a consistent focus on warrior toughness and resilience is key. In terms of, with that foundational cultural orientation, behavioral orientation, warrior focus, how do we make come alive their ability to contribute in an important way? And ready, relevant learning is our new approach to improve and address a number of the training deficiencies that have been noticed in the GAO report and elsewhere. And I would ask Admiral Kitchener to give you some specific detail in the surface force of how ready, relevant learning is making a difference. The one thing I would highlight, again, before I turn over to Admiral Kitchener, sir, that you point, we're very focused on retention, and it's strong right now. It's at a very strong level. But part of the reason we're focused on it is because recruiting is becoming increasingly difficult for all the services and really even more broadly. The last data I showed show that of that portion of the U.S. population that's eligible to serve, their propensity to serve from 2018 was 13%, and 2021 is down to 10%. I think all the service recruiters are seeing symptoms of the Great Resignation and or a labor market that is so tough that our new construction shipyards, our repair shipyards, our aviation depots, all are struggling to bring in. We're all competing for the same talented group. And so we're laser focused on that, strong retention. And in terms of ready, relevant learning, Roy, other thoughts you might have on that?
Yes, sir. To answer your question on some of the things we've done with training, particularly in the surface force, but I think this applies writ large across the Navy, is getting that training to the right sailor at the right time. And so one of our focus is being really to develop the from the apprentice to the journeyman to the master, which is something we got unfocused on over the years. And so now we've been able to come back and we're beginning to measure our ability to that training that we've given to that sailor. So if you come aboard a ship and you do a tour in an engineering department, then you would go back to shore to refine those skills. So when you came back out, you would be either that strong journeyman or perhaps that master. Or what we found before we embarked on what we call our Surf Mix program, which allows us to measure these things, is that we certainly had the right people on the ship, but they didn't have the right expertise, or they didn't have the years of training that we would require for that level. If you look back at how we apply the training to our new force, to our new sailors, to this generation, it really has gone back to focus on a virtual training. If you look at the engineering training that we conduct at Great Lakes, 10 years ago we maybe had one old engine that we would allow sailors to work on. Today, every engineering course has a virtual trainer that they can take things apart and look at things. We've proliferated that to the waterfront to the point of need where our sailors can come off ships and go and work on these things, particularly in the area of tactical training. I think our investments in our enlisted tactical training is very significant. and it resonates with our sailors, and we're able to maintain that proficiency. Because what we've learned through all the data that we've collected on all the training initiatives we have is that it's doing it time and time again is very critical, but it's also when was the last time you did it. The currency is very significant. And so putting these trainers at the waterfront has allowed us to do that.
Thank you. And my time expired, but just want to express gratitude for those who served during the pandemic, regardless of their individual health. They kept our country running. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Norcross. And now recognize Mr. Waltz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I was particularly disturbed by last month's GAO report, which detailed the comments of sailors from 16 different ships. And I think it's important to note one of the reasons the GAO went to sailor interviews so heavily was because of the lack of data and intermediate maintenance. And these sailors discussed their experiences, and basically they were discussing the same root problems that led to the disasters of 2017. We're 5 years away from that, as I mentioned. But I think we could go back as far as the Bilal report. I believe that was in 2010. And find similar themes and challenges as to what was now being reported in 2020 or 2022. So despite your actions, and I want to give credit for many of those actions, we're still receiving these troubling reports and comments from sailors reporting this, pointing at the same old problems. So there seems to be a disconnect between the initiatives and what we're hearing on the ground. Were you surprised? And to either one of you, were you surprised by what you were hearing from the sailors in that report?
Yeah, let me take that, and Roy, please pile on. I was not surprised, partly because of this journey I alluded to earlier about Navy taking a hard look at systemically weak performance is very much focused in two ways on shipyards and maintenance. What you highlighted as particularly troubling is absence of data is true. And in this case, I can, on an upside, report to you, that's in the intermediate phase now, and we're on it. That used to also be in the depot phase. It took 2 4-stars, myself and Admiral Caldwell, to break free the data in our public shipyards and get that released out of control so we can use it to drive this perform to plan, get real engine, which then becomes, is married with our get better engine. So the GAO report talked about a number of issues. It talked about manning. Let me offer you a few thoughts on that. The Navy from Fitz-McCain era has recognized that as an issue, and the Navy's pulled that lever hard. And so let's talk about why it was still manifest with those sailors. From January 17 to today, 10,000 more sailors at sea, 23,000 increase in end strength since 17, crew des billets being increased relentlessly, gaps at sea decreasing. The way we approach, partly as a learning from Fitz-McCain, is we allocate risk in manpower to the maintenance phase. And so we have to be eyes wide open about that. And as we still continue to close the manpower lever, that's what Admiral Kitchener can talk about, how we manage that risk in the maintenance phase. The related element I would like to highlight is partly because of what I talked about in the recruiting context. We're not going to just solve this by recurringly pulling the more sessions lever. We need to be thoughtful about demand reduction. And I don't mean demand reduction in the context of Chairman Garamendi said about less COCOMs, although that is a lever we're pulling in, and so to make that a supply-based discussion we can talk about. But I'm talking about in terms of condition-based maintenance and using our data and our AI in a best practice, for example, that Maersk does, to design our maintenance system on the ship to not oversubscribe the sailors.
Not to jump in, just for the interest of time.
Yeah.
I am all for pulling in private sector best practices. But I have to tell you, the fact that we didn't have data at the depot level, we don't have data at the intermediate level, do you find that acceptable?
It's completely unacceptable, but Ranking Member, I can tell you, These initiatives broadly that we've been scaling for 4 years now are absolutely driving data. If you look in the aviation enterprise and what Airbus is doing, it's phenomenally impressive. The Fleet Readiness Analytic Group, and Roy has created a surface action analytics group that is completely data-driven. The shipyards now, the public shipyards, absolutely data-driven. Private shipyards, we need to work as well to make that richer. Intermediate maintenance, just as an example, we did use intermediate maintenance data in some of the earlier performed or planned initiatives in undersea and in the private shipyards. It's just not as rich as it needs to be. But, Ranking Member, I would tell you there is no lack of understanding of the power of data. And the other thing I would like to highlight, we have an exceptional data scientist group at the Center for Naval Analyses that uses data in incredibly powerful ways. And in fact, when I benchmark personally with senior executives at world-class companies outside the DoD ecosphere in search of best practice for large velocity, high volume deck plate problem solving, when they see how the Navy has used large data to leverage and move outcome, they are the ones that are asked for the next meeting.
Thank you for that. We are running out of time to do better. I mean, you're going to hear that from me every single chance. The threat briefs versus the systems that we're getting in place doesn't line up. Admiral Kitcher, just in the, I don't see the clock going, so I don't. Oh, we're good. All right, thanks. So I'm a little thrown off on that, but we talked yesterday about your 10-year horizon on the modernization piece, but yet overlaid with probably what I believe is a 4 to 7 year horizon where we may go to high-end conflict in the Pacific. Talk to me about that disconnect in terms of timing. I feel like we have to get out of this mode of asking for what we think we can get versus what we need, and then talk to us about the gaps if we get it, what we get to you or then what we get to you too late. We need to understand those gaps. How do you accelerate, and do you have to ask for more resources, both either internally or to us, to accelerate that modernization?
Thank you for the questions.
And I'd ask you to be brief. I don't want to monopolize the time.
Okay, thank you for the question. When we put together the strategy, or when I put together the competitive edge strategy, it was to not only make what we have now more ready and produce more ready ships that I have, and that was mostly an analytics-driven adventure that we've been running, and it's producing really good results, so that now we know. Because what we've done, to kind of go back to the last question a little bit, is we do a very good job of deploying our ships and making them ready when they go forward. They're manned, they're certified to the missions we decide they're certified to, and they are trained to a very high level. That is done very well. In the maintenance phase and in the initial parts of our training phase, we take risk. Because
or robbing from Peter to pay Paul.
Yes, sir. That's where we take our risk consciously. And I watch that very carefully. It's particularly in the maintenance phase, because as a ship comes out of maintenance and transitions to start its workup training, it's a very critical point. You know, it's a high failure point is what we look at. And if you don't have the right people on deck and you don't have the right people certifying to the right standard, then you could get in trouble. So I pay a very close attention to that.
Thank you for that. If you could send the rest of that for the record, I would appreciate it, and I look forward to having that conversation with you. I would just one quick statement or final point. I want to mention that we've been made aware of an issue regarding inoperable ovens on CVN 77 after a lengthy availability, and it's our hope we can get those fixed. We got to feed the sailors. Nutrition before mission, as my first platoon sergeant told me. That came to us at a recent visit, and we wanted to make you aware of it. And again, we're paying close attention to what the sailors are telling us and what's motivating them to stay in the Navy and continue to serve this great nation. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Waltz.
Hey,
now
Chairman.
recognize Mr. Langevin for 5 minutes.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Very good. Thank you. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today. Thank you for your service. Let me begin with this, and this is for both of our witnesses. So I've been told that there is a chronic overuse of the surface force, causing fatigue, low morale, and safety concerns. I know we touched on this a bit already this morning. So the question is the Navy fleet leadership empowered to relay concerns of fatigue and overwork when a mission is requested, especially a non-essential mission? And does the current culture allow fleet leadership to communicate these concerns?
Yes, sir. So those, I alluded to it in an earlier answer, very direct opportunity for the Chief of Naval Operations to influence requests for forces above the baseline plan for the year. Obviously, the world gets a vote, and it's a risk decision, but with the Navy having a very strong voice, one element of that I would highlight, if you look at, for example, steaming days in FY20, the Navy executed well above the plan. In FY21 last year, the decrease in the annual steaming days was about 7,000 to 22,000, so a non-trivial substantial decrease reflecting the Navy voice that the force was being oversubscribed. Nonetheless, the concern remains, it's real. The tension is real between the need for combatant commanders and the ability to deliver ready, lethal, properly trained and equipped naval forces. One other thing I would highlight very quickly before turning it over to Admiral Kitchener, besides that demand lever, some of the other actions I talked about were very focused on to pull on this fatigue issue within the way a unit is manned today, to pull workload off the sailor. Clearly, I'd mentioned condition-based maintenance and using AI. In aviation, we did a maintenance program reset that took 30% of the scheduled maintenance out of a VFA squadron by giving a homework assignment to NavAir Syscom to go back and look at the totality of maintenance requirements that have been added over the life of the Hornet. And we'd learned that they had all been added and never pulled out. We reduced scheduled maintenance by 30%. I directed Naval Sea Systems Command to do the same homework assignment for our ships. And so, again, looking to see if we can, in terms of the 67-hour designed work week for our sailors when deployed, to pull off unnecessary, unvalue-added work. The last item I would highlight in there's also the opportunity to adjust mission. So OpNav N9 has a homework assignment right now to look at the required operational capabilities, the mission assignments, which drives the manning requirements for all our surface ships. And an example of an actual case, a cruiser that based on where it was ordered, did not have the need to do a maritime interdiction operation, visit board, search and seizure, and pull that workload off the sailors. All elements of us thinking, how do you both pull work off as well as bring an additional supply on? Roy, your thoughts?
When will they be reporting back to you, Admiral, on those requests that you've made and for those changes? Do you have a time certain as to when they'll be reporting back to you?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Is there a time certain when they will be reporting back to you on those findings, the things that you've laid out as in terms of changes?
I believe you're asking about the homework assignment to NAVC to report on the ability analytically, not just to remove, but analytically to remove maintenance requirements. Is that the question?
Yeah. Yes.
I don't have a solid estimate for that, but I'm happy to close the loop for you when I get that.
Okay. Thank you. Admiral Kitchener?
I'll speak at a very kind of strategic level here, sir, but I think to answer your question, we do a very good job, in my opinion, between myself and the numbered fleet commander on ensuring that ships are manned, trained, and certified for the mission. I can give you examples of cases where we needed to accomplish the maintenance, or if a training entitlement wasn't completed, where we delayed a ship from proceeding on to the next phase of its maintenance. The one I would tell you that is most recent to me is it's a group that just came back, the Essex ARG. They were going out and they needed to go to the Middle East to support operations there, and we had to do some critical repairs to the ship. And I said, hey, this is what we need to do. It took us a little bit longer than we thought. We delayed the deployment. We still got there on time and executed the mission, but we made sure they were ready for it. We do the same thing with training, so we don't put sailors in positions or ships in positions where they're not ready to execute the mission. I think that works very well. If I don't agree on it with the numbered fleet commander, or there's a disagreement with us, then we go to the 4-star fleet commander and it's adjudicated at that level. It's a robust C2. It came out of the McCain-Fitz.
Thank you, Admiral Kitchener. Well, thank you. We got the gist, I think, of the answer, so that was good. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Langevin. Next up is Mr. Scott.
Thank you. And Admirals, Mr. Wilson and Chairman Courtney both alluded to the Black Sea area, and you certainly timely, maybe not for the specific subject matter, but very timely. And while you discussed the capabilities that we have in the Black Sea region, it's my understanding that we do not have a strategy for the Black Sea region. Is that correct?
Maybe you could amplify more. I don't understand.
My understanding is that NATO nor the U.S. has developed a strategy for the Black Sea region.
I'm unaware of a specific Navy strategy for the Black Sea.
Mm-hmm. So I have kind of a suggestion, Mr. Courtney, and this is not a suggestion for admirals, but for the people that are watching around the world. I think that the UN should declare a no-go zone in the Black Sea for Russian warships and for the skies above the Ukraine. And I think that the UN should ask the world to enforce those no-go zones. The Ukrainian people and President Zelensky have done a tremendous job putting up a fight against superior forces. I have very serious reservations of whether or not they can hold on if the Russians are hitting them from the air, the land, and the sea. The world has an obligation, and perhaps it is the UN that should propose the no-go zones and have that vote, and then the world needs to be prepared to enforce those. With that said, how much coordination is there with our NATO allies with regard to procurement, maintenance, material conditioning, and training? Our NATO allies now recognize, including Germany, that they're going to have to spend 2%. How much coordination is there with the purchase of the ships and the weapons and the training that we need to defend the world from people like Vladimir Putin?
You know, I'm thinking of specific examples that might come to mind there. And I'm not, I don't have a lot of detail at my fingertips, so I'm happy to take that for the record as well. The foreign military sales program, nonetheless, of the U.S. is robust globally. And my side picture is at a very strong level. So without being able to provide specific elements of our NATO allies today, I would offer that as a baseline context and then offer to get back to you with more detail.
I suppose my point for the committee and for the admirals is that it's a whole lot cheaper to buy the second than it is to develop the first of a weapon system. And it seems to me that perhaps coordination among NATO countries might get us all more of the weapons and the equipment that we need for a lot less money. And so if we're going to buy two, and the Brits are going to buy two, and the Germans are going to buy two, then purchasing 6 at one time would give the U.S. and our NATO allies in the world a better deal on what it takes to secure the world from people like Vladimir Putin. What are the crews being trained on today with regard to the combat at sea, potential combat at sea? What specific areas are you training the most for?
Sir, we train them at integrated air and missile defense, against not only ballistic missile defense threats, but also against air launch and surface launch and sub-launch cruise missiles. We actually share a facility with the Nautic team on my air colleagues up in Fallon, Nevada, where we integrate our destroyers and our cruiser crews in with pilots sitting in tubs, and then we network out to the air wing on the Fallon range. So that's pretty sophisticated. Our WIDIs at the Surface Mine and Warfare Development Center have been working extensively on a SAG tactics, how to defeat high-end Chinese surface ships so we can take those down and allow our other precision fires to interdict. And then, of course, anti-submarine warfare, which we continue to get better and better at as we get more and more practice.
If I could ask one quick question, Admiral, do you feel like you have enough weapons in your wartime reserve right now?
In our wartime reserve, we have enough weapons going out on our deployed ships, sir, and we're ready to take the fight there.
I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Chair now recognizes Mr. Golden.
Thank you. Last year, we had some testimony to the subcommittee about conventional prompt strike. I've seen some reports recently that the timeline might have slipped on deploying that on the Zumwalt away from FY25. I was just curious for any kind of update you can provide.
Thanks for that question. My sideline is that conventional prompt strike on the Zumwalt is still targeting the FY25 timeframe, and on Virginia Block 5, FY28. I would put an immense caveat to that, however, which is we need your partnership to enact the funding to do that. If this CR continues this year, those timelines will absolutely slide.
Thank you. That's helpful. We've had a lot of supported testimony from the Navy over the last couple of years about follow-on multi-year procurement related to the DDG Flight 3. Of course, the subcommittee included a provision to tell the Navy to go ahead and do that, give it the authority to do that last year. We didn't land there with the Senate, but there was a reporting requirement to the Navy to get back to Congress about the value of a follow-on multi-year procurement financially, et cetera. Do you know anything about the status of that get back and when we might be able to expect something back from the Navy?
I'm not familiar with the status, but we will get that back to you.
Yeah, if we could get that back for the record, I'd appreciate it very much. Thank you. That's it. Thanks.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Gallagher.
I keep getting demoted on this committee, by the way. I have to wait longer. But in response to Representative Wilson's questions, Admiral Lesher, about Ukraine working with Turkey, you said, quote, "What it does highlight in a positive sense, from a strategic perspective, we're focused on integrated deterrence that you see being done very incredibly well." I'm intrigued by this concept of integrated deterrence. I am eagerly awaiting the publication of the National Security Strategy and then the National Defense Strategy, and assume integrated deterrence will be the cornerstone of it. But in this context and in light of your comments, two questions about integrated deterrence. What do you see being integrated into deterrence that wasn't there before?
So the concept, as I was highlighting it, is integrated across all domains. So you see an increased focus in the joint warfighting concept, multi-domain, integrating the domains, which is not to say they weren't before. It's an evolution, for sure. And then the broader, again, evolution to focus and deliver as part of a joint force, as part of whole of government, and working in particular with allies and partners, all an evolution and an emphasis, I think, that you're familiar with.
But if we're doing integrated deterrence very incredibly well in Ukraine, it raises a second question, which is, what did we deter?
Excellent question, I suppose. So we're deterring any expansion into the NATO territories that we're committed to defend.
But in a very real sense, I think, would it be fair to say deterrence, we failed to deter Putin from invading, correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
So there was a deterrence failure. I don't mean this to score a cheap point. I just think that's interesting. That's something we should study. We should understand why it happened. My own view, and this gets to integrated deterrence and part of why I'm skeptical of the concept, is that if it is used to suggest that we can rely on non-military tools, specifically sanctions, or hashtag diplomacy in order to deter, uncoupled from a credible military threat, then we'll have further deterrence failures. My bias is that you have to put hard power in the path of people like Putin or Xi Jinping in order to have a hope of deterrence. I would go further and say this is the first test, real-world test of integrated deterrence, and it failed. We need to learn from that, right? I want to deter. We all want to deter. We don't want to deal with an incursion into NATO. We certainly don't want to deal with a conflict over Taiwan. But if integrated deterrence is a smokescreen for cutting our investments in hard power and somehow believing that untested technology, which won't be fielded until the end of the decade or the next decade, or allies, or statements coming out of Davos or the UN can substitute for hard power, I think we're going to see further deterrence failures. Now, I understand there are many in the building who disagree with me, and I'm open to the counter-argument, but it is a matter of fact that deterrence failed in this case. I welcome the stiffening of the Europeans' position, the shift that I perceive in Germany, the unification of the West. These are great developments that we should build upon, but deterrence still failed. And so I would argue perhaps we didn't do integrated deterrence, whatever that means, very incredibly well. And I think it would help. Usually I actually ask questions. I don't do speeches like this, but you've touched a nerve for me. One way I think the best lesson I think we can learn from this is actually in a different theater. It is in Indo-PACOM. I think the lesson is we need to think about how we armed Taiwan yesterday, right? Yep. After things start going boom, it's going to be hard to surge support, and we are engaged in a process of trying to deter the PLA by denial, and the threat of sanctions and the threat of a sternly worded mean tweet from the State Department press secretary is not going to deter Xi Jinping. I yield my remaining second.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Actually, just one response, which again, I think you raised really excellent question there, but there is examples of integrated deterrence that is happening out there, particularly in the ASW domain, where our allies are very integrated in terms of the U.S. Navy as far as dealing with that specific threat. And I don't know if you want to just maybe.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to amplify. It's almost a straw man to say integrated deterrence would somehow be divorced from a comprehensive integrated approach that relies on military power. I would be equally with you, Representative, if that's somehow decoded as a stovepipe device comprehensive approach. And to your point, is it successful or not? The context of the U.S. Approach here would be in defense of the NATO allies. And so I believe we'll see how that turns out.
Thank you, Admiral. Yep. Chair now recognizes Congresswoman Luria.
Yes, I was going to shift back, Admiral Lesher, to some things that you mentioned in your statement. So I'll just quote what you wrote. You said, "Too often, from an institutional perspective, we have viewed poor performance as one-off failures, made short-term adjustments, and focused on administrative solutions, adding burdensome regulations and guidance over developing our people," end quote. But then you go on to talk about all the administrative solutions and guidance that you've put in place to fix this problem, such as Get Real, Get Better, Learning to Action Board, Safety Management System, Performance to Plan, Navy Sustainment System, additional fire safety inspections and requirements, more requirements for training officers, and the list is pretty long. So just looking at the Bonhomme Richard as an example, and you've talked about different causes for these types of incidents, would you say that that was cultural? Was it training? Was it programmatic? Can you describe where you
Yeah, no,
that fit?
my fundamental diagnosis of Bonhomme Richard was remarkable organizational drift and an insufficiently intrusive ISIC. That's a bad combination. So the question that then emerges is why? What drove that? I believe our sight picture on we hadn't properly trained our individuals going into these maintenance depots necessarily. So the damage control industrial certification being one remedy for that. It's a very fair question on whether we're not, by proliferating guidelines, regulations, instructions as our primary method of learning, that's not oversubscribing the ability of our triads and our people to process them. There's a really interesting learning example in naval reactors, which you might say is the exemplar of that culture. And they are in a strong push to step back from 100-page instructions and really start making that knowledge come alive with a principles-based approach. What are the 8 principles of radiological?
Perhaps in the time we have is limited, so I would love to follow up and learn more about, how they're evolving that, and perhaps learn from Admiral Caldwell as well. So none of the things that we talked about, specifically within this statement and the problems within the surface fleet involve warfighting. They involve basic routine navigation, for example, and import maintenance operations. But if you look at warfighting, for example, and I asked Admiral Aquilino this question a few years ago in a similar hearing when he was still the commander of Pacific Fleet, just want to know where you assess and are we taking appropriate and equal actions to evaluate our proficiency in the warfighting realm?
Yeah, I think there's very strong, particularly in the surface community, very strong progress on warfighting. If you want to amplify a bit, Roy.
Yes, ma'am. I think one of what we've done is we're trying to emulate what we did with developing our maritime skills continuum. We did a really good job of, after the collisions, and saying, okay, here's what we need to be, how we need to be proficient, and here's how we get there and what we need to measure. We've taken the same approach to tactical proficiency, and we've sort of turned our witties loose at our Surface and Mine Warfare Development Center to come up with this program. The initial results are we've gone in and we're looking and measuring through a series of tests where our students are coming out of, say, department head school or some of our milestone schools. And then we have a methodology for evaluating them during exercises and building that expertise, getting them into those trainers and then integrating them. But I think what's essential to it has been the ability to measure it so that now we can actually get them into a trainer, understand where their deficiencies are and correct those. And so it's something that we've embarked on over the last year and utilizing those trainers we developed and collecting that data, and that's the trajectory we're on. And I'd be happy to talk to you about it further.
Sure, and you talked about, this is for ship handling, these go, no-go checkpoints. So some data I would like to know is, how many officers have been through these checkpoints, how many have been a no-go, specifically how many prospective commanding officers have been no-goes and not passed that milestone in order to go to command. And moreover, this kind of ties back into my question about warfighting, is why is the surface fleet not doing something similar to the submarine commander's course, where all of these elements are evaluated before someone can actually take command?
I think that is the journey that we were on. I think that is eventually what we want to do. We want to get to a tactical course, a capstone course that they go through, that they do before command. To answer your question directly on the number of COs that have been through, I'll have to come back to you on that, but I believe the number is about 13 that have not been able to proceed on to command, that were no-go at their command assessment.
And for scale sake, at what percentage, or 13 out of several hundred, or?
It's probably, and I'd come back to you on that one because I don't want to speculate, but it's.
Okay, just kind of want to understanding the scope. But I mean, it is good to hear that it is actually a checkpoint and that the people who are not meeting that are actually not progressing on.
And that's at both the command level and at the major command level.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Great, thank you. Chair now recognizes Mr. Bergman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Admirals, you've touched the nerve in several of us. I was sitting up in my office. I'm a pretty fast writer, sometimes not legible, but I was writing as fast as I could when the acronyms and the buzzwords started to flow, Admiral Lesher. L2AB, okay? Simplify, streamline, and design. Get real, get better. Perform to plan. Self-assessing, self-correcting. I'm not sure what year you got your wings, but did Benny Suggs and Any Mouse exist? Is a naval aviator, we used to have, and this was not just to the aviation units, but AnyMouse, which was acronym for Anonymous at the time. You had your little box in the squadron ready room or in the maintenance spaces where you could actually, anybody, whether you were that newest sailor or Marine in that unit or that, you know, someone below the CO and the XO and the NATOPS and the safety, can sit there and get real-time feedback from those under your command about just, hey, Anonymous, this is what's going on. Benny Suggs, beneficial suggestions. You know, those were two very simple feedback loops that were used 50-plus years ago. I don't know if they worked. I do know that as a former NATOPS and safety officer at the squadron level, that the only thing I feared is if I ever had a perfect flight, I would never, ever get into an aircraft ever again, because that would mean the next one was going to be a real bear. All right? So the point is, and again, I'm not to dwell on aviation here, but I think it's a comparative example that we continue to learn from. There was a time in naval aviation that aviators didn't really fear a sim ride. It's just another, you know, I'll take my chances in the aircraft itself. Well, as a commercial airline pilot, if we didn't pass our check ride, we didn't have a paycheck or a job. So that culture, I believe, has changed over the last few decades because of what we can do in simulators for all of our, you know, all of our servicemen and women, regardless of your, you know, regardless of your service. I guess what concerns me is that we, at the higher levels, have spent too much time playing with words rather than challenging people, our young folks who come into our services at this day and age, come in with maybe different skill sets, different levels of maturity, because an 18-year-old in our country today, according to the data that's out there by some very good social scientists, the average 18-year-old in our country today is performing emotionally at about 16 and a half to 17. So think about that when those young recruits enter boot camp at Great Lakes. By the way, the Navy, and thanks to Vern Clark for what he did in his vision of that new basic training center up at Great Lakes. I was a guest there a long time ago and had a chance to tour it, because you're getting in the minds and the heads of those young trainees. I was even impressed with the Dr. Scholl's little machine you stood on there to see if your shoes, your boots were going to fit right. You know, as Marines, that never really happened. You know, you were lucky to have, you know, things that didn't leak or didn't create fungus on your feet, but that's a different story. But you have done so much, but we're not there. We are not there, and we need to be there, and we need to stop with the acronyms to a point, get back to things like AnyMouse or Benny's, whatever we're going to call it, create a feedback loop that gives it to you immediately, and I'm going to give you one acronym that if you want to use it, great. We've all heard about tough love, right? You get nothing done out of hate. It's all out of love. So in this case, the tough, and as a Marine, I'm spelling challenged, so I'm just going to say TUF, and that's train until failure. Because if you fail in your training, you learn. And with that, I yield back, and I thank you for never quitting on those sailors, Marines, and civilians under your command. And set the expectations high, and don't try to BS this group, because we're here to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bergman. Chair now recognizes Ms. Jacobs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Admiral Lesher, a lot of my colleagues have already brought up the findings of the recent GAO report, but I want to focus on one specific issue that I believe deserves extra focus. GAO found that the surface fleet is 15% undermanned compared to required levels. Since undermanning was part of the reason for the Fitzgerald and McCain disasters, why has more not been done to fix this in the last 5 years? What is the Navy doing to increase manning, and when will surface ships be fully manned with the proper fit?
Thanks for that question. A couple of dimensions on which to answer it. I talked about the remarkable growth in end strength in the Navy since the 2017 and the GAO report. So very much getting after it. And part of the reason that it remains undermanned is because we've been adding billets as well. So as we've added, the end strength of the Navy's grown 23,000, as we talked about, since 2017. As we add billets to address the overwork issue and make sure the crew is sized for everything that's expected on that ship, we're then chasing that with our accessions. So we're closing the gaps across the Navy. The other element is we have very strong certification and focus on what the manpower, the manning that we deploy our ships with. And so the remaining work for us to get after with a strong sense of urgency is across the full OFRP cycle as well. There's an element, and I see that Ranking Member Waltz has left, where he was talking about, hey, where is data being used by Navy? And I'd like Admiral Kitchener to talk about the surface maintenance experience point, which shows another way, ma'am, which the Navy is bringing a sense of urgency to not only bring in more sailors, to get the proper requirements level on the destroyers, but also to allocate that scarce resource in the most data-driven, powerful way. And Roy, if you'd care to talk about that.
Yes, sir. And so what we found as we man our ships to the 92, 95 fit fill was that we weren't necessarily getting the right combination of people. I talked a little bit about it earlier with the apprentice journeyman supervisor thing. So I did not have a vote on where to send certain people. And so we stood up a SurfMex. We looked at the aviation model where they look at tracking expertise and proficiency. So we did it with 6 rates in the Navy. Most of it was in engineering and some warfighting rates as well. And what we do now is we track each individual and what their proficiency and experience is, and then we are able to put them where we think we need them. For example, if a ship is down in a number of years of experience in an engineering work center or an Aegis fire control system, we can actually make sure we send the right person there that increases the proficiency. It's a much better measure of fit. We've been doing it for a year now. Right now, it's part of the manning process, but we're using it extensively to sort of fill those gaps at sea that we talked about, making sure we have the right people to go there. So very encouraging results to date, and I think it's a metric that we're going to continue to go after and allow us to make sure we have that manning right on the ship.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate that, especially because we had a hearing on the effectiveness of suicide prevention programs yesterday, and it was extremely disheartening to hear reports that ship's crew members reported that they have lost at least one service member to suicide and dozens of others due to mental health issues over a 7-month period. And so I really hope that you're working on, addressing the unsafe conditions and the safety measures and the hours and leave and all of that so that we are addressing that issue. In my last minute, I also wanted to ask that the GAO has also found that the Navy is not enforcing its fatigue policies in the surface fleet, with most sailors receiving 5 hours or less of sleep. Why has the Navy failed to fix this, and what are you doing to ensure sailors receive the required amount of sleep?
About a year ago, we finally came up in the Surface Navy with a pretty rigorous policy for what we want to do for fatigue management. We set our goal as 7.5 hours of sleep a night. Today, I can tell you we get to about 6 hours. So clearly, some more work to be done. We're teamed up with the National Health Center, ONR, the Naval Postgraduate School, a bunch of other groups, some of the fitness experts that we work with, measuring giving people wearables on ships so we can measure how much time, and so we actually have the data to understand it. We've introduced some watch station tools, and we've also so a CO can manage his people as he tracks their fatigue. So I'm encouraged, but we still have a lot of work to do, and I could talk about it at another time on how we monitor how well we're doing at it. Over.
Well, thank you so much. As a representative of San Diego, these issues are deeply personal to me and my constituents. So I will continue pushing you to do better for our surface warfare officers. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, and thank you for those questions, Ms. Jacobs. Next up is Mr. Moore. Is he still on WebEx? There he is. Hey, Blake.
Yeah, I'm on WebEx. I'm here. Thank you.
you hear me okay?
Hear you fine.
Great. I'm a little distracted today. I wanted to personally apologize to both of you, to Admiral and Vice Admiral. If the House of Representatives failed the military and veteran community today, there's a bill about toxic burn pits that passed unanimously out of the Senate, and Speaker Pelosi puts a different bill that she knows Republicans won't broadly support. We've delayed this for too long. There are numerous Republicans that have been very supportive. I've co-sponsored legislation on this. This was just one of the most frustrating things that I've seen in my time here related to our veteran community, and I wanted to just personally apologize to you and take that few moments to do. I'm not trying to be political about this. I've shared my thoughts with other members. We owe it to our veterans to not play partisan political games with your lives. If we truly care about toxic burn pits, we would have passed and put on the floor the version that passed unanimously in the Senate. There is no way around that. That is a sheer partisan game, and it's the most frustrating thing that I've seen. But going with the topic at hand, there's been a lot that's been highlighted about the detrimental and toxic impacts of insufficient manning, inadequate training, and low morale. I applaud the Navy for having the foresight and humility to take an introspective look at how we can do better to avoid these tragic accidents. The reforms discussed today will certainly save lives, and from your testimonies, and improve lethality and effectiveness of our surface Navy. As co-chair of the Depot Caucus, I would like to use my time to discuss the degraded material condition, delayed maintenance, and expired training certificates of our forward deployed ships. Again, depot work is very important to my district and to many across the country, and vital for our readiness. I pose these questions to both of you gentlemen. Either of you or one of you wants to respond. Investigation into these incidents revealed that fleet leadership often properly reported on material deficiencies, only to be ignored or relieved. Were these reports ignored due in part to deficiencies or lack of capacity at our shipyards and the Navy Organic Industrial Base? Can you shed a little light on that?
Sir, I'm unfamiliar with the details of what you described. Is there a source, or can you help me understand better?
I don't have any particular source on it right now, and I'm happy to submit something more specific, more substantive via written, if that's if you'd prefer.
That'd be helpful. I will say, again, we've been swarming, I would say, very intensely the depot maintenance issues since 2018 in particular to look at this. In the private shipyards, Admiral Kitchener leads the effort to perform the plan to drive improvements there, and it's focused on being very radically transparent about what we see. Again, it was the genesis, the kernel of what it means to get real. Public shipyards as well, my view, we're approaching an inflection point in the performance of the public shipyards. And so I'll be eager to see and address the issues that you highlight.
And even if we just make it about delayed maintenance, has delayed maintenance, just in general, without any specifics, played a role in these training mishaps? Would you be able to pinpoint any examples there?
I can talk about it. I think in the past, what we found, particularly in the forward deployed naval force, was that we did not have a good record of doing our continuous maintenance. As we came out of that incident, we've corrected that. And so now all the maintenance gets done. We still struggle a little bit in one of the ports out there because of in Sasebo, because of a capacity issue. But overall, in general, we are not deferring maintenance. And if we do defer any kind of maintenance on a ship, it is done at the highest level. That decision is made. But that perhaps is what you're referring to. In the past, there was an issue, particularly in the forward deployed naval force.
The one thing I might add very quickly, sir, is, and it gets back to the earlier comment about the impact of a CR, we will be deferring maintenance non-trivially if I'm just looking at the numbers in terms of a continuing resolution for the balance of this year.
I appreciate your comments on the continuing resolution. Again, another example of my apologies to you about how ineffective and decrepit our House of Representatives is, and we're playing games with partisan games and not providing our military what they need. It's a frustrating thing. So I have a whole nother question on being fully funded. I am out of time, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vice Admiral Kitchener, I'm sure you're familiar with the retired Vice Admiral Belisle's 2010 report on the health of the service Navy. The report was pretty scathing, in which I read the Navy's declining service readiness. This committee has conducted several investigations since his report and still has grave concerns facing the fleet. In the simplest of terms, I don't have a military background, and I'm a layman. So if you could explain to me in layman's terms, and really the American people, in layman's terms, we had 4 accidents in 2017, where, if my data is correct, 3 collisions and 1 ran aground. 1 ship ran aground, which seems crazy to me with how big the ocean is, and I mean, to have 3 accidents, 3 ships hit each other. They're pretty big vessels. It's not like you can't see them. So if you can explain to me in layman's terms without, and I would echo Mr. Bergman's, I don't know all the acronyms, just in layman's terms, how does that happen? I'm sorry, is it a training? Is it a equipment? Is it just in the simplest terms?
When we looked at those incidents that you referred to, ma'am, we kind of focused on two specific areas. One was on the training, which you brought up, and we found that at the time, a surface junior officer, one of our newest people coming to control the ship, drive the ship, their training was, we weren't giving them enough time. We weren't giving them enough time in simulators, giving them the fundamentals. So we focused on the training, and we developed a continuum that now, back then.
Has that been corrected then?
Yes. And so when an ensign reported aboard a ship back in 2017, they got about 150 hours in a simulator, which we just had a discussion on. Yep. Today, they get 750 hours of training. And so that was one of the areas we approached. Another one was we looked at maintenance, which we just had a discussion on. And in the forward deployed naval force at the time, we weren't doing all of our continuous maintenance. And so
and we weren't doing it, why?
We weren't doing it because of the ships were required to be operational. There wasn't that balance we have now where we have a tension between the operational team and the maintenance.
There was no slack in the system. They had to be deployed.
There was a demand signal for ships to be operational. And so what we did is we went back and we looked at that and we corrected the maintenance that we did. And at the same time, we looked at, are they certified to do the missions? Are we taking these people that are trained, putting them on ships and putting them in a situation that they are not trained for? We corrected that. So now all the certifications are completed before we send a ship out on a mission. And that's and I described a little bit earlier as the type commander, the individual responsible for man training and equipping those ships. I have a good, healthy tension with that fleet commander out there who wants to use them for operations. And if they're not ready, then we have a discussion. And if we can't agree to it, and then it's resolved at the 4-star command level.
So, and again, forgive my newness.
That's okay.
But when you say we have a discussion, if they're not ready, I'll assume if they're not ready, we're not going to deploy them.
They do not go.
Okay. Thank you, sir. With that, I'll yield my time back.
Thank you, Ms. McLean. Thank you for asking that question, because that was sort of the debate after McCain and Fitzgerald about whether we should put a safety brake on the system, which is Admiral Richardson, who was CNO at the time, described. And again, I think, that really is one of the real accomplishments. Still not, we're not perfect yet, but, that helped, right? Yeah. Great. Great, thank you. Congresswoman Lurie had requested about a minute and a half or so just for another follow-up question. Chair recognizes Ms. Lurie.
Well, thank you for the additional time. And I just wanted to follow up to my previous question, and it was really about the effectiveness of our warfighting. So you've done a good job today, and I've had separate conversations with Admiral Lesher many times about how you're improving in the basic things. And you have metrics for that. And you can say it for the ship driving, for navigation. You can show it in things with maintenance where you've done a very analytical basis. But I mean, the bottom line is, what do we have to show that we're ready? And we're ready to fight a peer competitor as far as our warfighting skills and capabilities. So that is really, where my question lies. And we can follow up, and I would love to learn more in-depth information about, how you're measuring that. I think that is the next step and the most important step as we face what we're facing in the Pacific. But the next thing is language. Reading your statements, hearing you speak, you seem to choose your words very carefully, but they don't really sound like, normal people in the Navy speak. They don't sound like, the normal public would listen to. And even, some of the things that have been put out, by the Navy and various commands within the Navy on social media that are trying to reach the broader public to explain, the purpose of your mission and why we have a Navy and why these investments are so important and really have never been more critical. So I just urge you a lot, like my colleague maybe did in all forums, to just look at the language you're using and make sure it's clear and concise and to the point. Like, you're getting a message out there. You want the public to know that a Navy is absolutely essential to our national defense, and especially in the environment that we're in today. So I think that would be helpful, not only in coming to us to let us as Congress know why you're asking for the things you're asking in the budget, for the broader public to know why it's a good investment of their tax dollars. So thank you.
Thank you. Now recognize Mr. Garamendi for final comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The comments very, very quick. Today's testimony, questions, and the answers lead me to believe that the Navy is in the process of addressing the manifold problems that have been highlighted in this hearing. I look forward to seeing the specific plan, the integration of the 4 different elements that you've described, and then also how you intend to drive those activities down onto each and every ship, and then how to monitor the success of that. I look forward to that. We'll be following up. And my final point is, if it takes direction, money beyond the current little problem of the continuing resolution, we need to know. With that, I yield back and thank the witnesses. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to both my colleagues. Again, and to the witnesses, we covered actually a broader range today, but obviously with events going on, that's not unexpected. Obviously, we'll be seeing you soon, I'm sure, once we get President's budget and posture hearings. Thank you again for, again, the follow-up from our classified briefing and today's public hearing. And with that, the hearing is adjourned.